Good morning. We're starting back in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 14. And it says, "Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel." Now that word ordained is used about God investing authority, giving authority to people to do something for him. In Mark chapter 3 and verse 14, he says, "And he ordained 12 that they should be with him, that he might send them forth to preach." And then we go back in John chapter 16, I believe. Let's see. No. Chapter, I lost it. I had it. Okay, here it is. John chapter 15 and 16. "Ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you and ordained you that ye should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit should remain, that whatsoever ye shall ask of the Father in my name, may give it to you." John 15 and 16. So Jesus talked to his disciples and told him they were chosen by him and ordained. And that's what ordained constantly lets you know, that God has chosen a person, someone, and given them the authority that they need to do what he has chosen them to do. And so when Paul said, "Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel," he was ordaining them to receive help from people who were saved in order to be able to carry the gospel forth. And that was in them feeding him or giving him money to be able to live. I mean, when God started the church, he started the church and used the people who were just working for a living. He gave them the admonition to pay their tithes, so that the ministers wouldn't have to work and they could just be busy about the gospel, doing the things that the gospel required. And that he ordained that. He ordained that. And that's what Paul's saying right there. "Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel." Of course, we know that some people are living better and greater than the people they're ministering to, and that's strange. You know what I mean? The people they're ministering to mostly are not rich, but the ministers are rich, and that is not really what the Lord meant for us to do. He meant for us to have, us ministers, have what we needed so we could do the work of the gospel without having to work a job and support ourselves. That we should live of the gospel, but not get rich of the gospel. He never said that. And of course, Paul was more interested in spreading the gospel than he was gathering up money. He wasn't wanting to gather up money, but he was trying to tell the church, this church in Corinth, that it was of God for them to give their tithe and give their offerings in order for people like Paul, who had brought the gospel to them, to be able to carry on the gospel, carry it to others, and do the work that they were ordained to do. Verse 15 said, "But I have used none of these things, neither have I written these things that it should be so done unto me. For it were better for me to die than that any man should make my glorying void." So he wasn't taking their money. He wasn't using them to help him go on. He didn't want to do that, because he said it would make my glorying void. And what that means was he wouldn't be able to glorify the Lord, glorify his work there, if any of them felt like he was doing it for the money. So that's that is something that ministers really contend with, that God uses the church to help them to carry the gospel, but the church may misunderstand and think a true preacher of the gospel is doing it for the money, and then that's when his glorying becomes void, when he can't glory in it anymore. He can't glory in being supported by the church to preach the gospel. Can't glory in it because somebody looks at it and says he's doing it for the money. Okay, so verse 16 says, "For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yea, woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel." So it was imperative that he kept on preaching the gospel, because God, it wouldn't lay in his heart right if he didn't. "For if I do this thing willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will, a dispensation of the gospel is committed unto me." So he was saying, if I'm willing, then I'll get a reward. But if I'm not willing, I'm still going to have to do it. It's going to be given to me to do. "What is my reward then? Verily, that when I preach the gospel, I may make the gospel of Christ without charge, that I abuse not my power in the gospel. For though I be free from all men, yet have I made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more." Makes me cry. Oh, Paul kept his eyes on the prize. He kept his eyes on what he was going for. What was he going for? For people to make it to heaven. For them to make it to heaven. For people to be able to go to heaven, not have to go to hell. For him to preach the gospel. That was his reward. That I might gain the more. "And unto the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law is under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. To them that are without law is without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law." So Paul is talking about how he tried to do toward anybody that he preached. He tried to help them to understand the truth of God's word, of what they should do, how they should live. And the Jews, they were under the law, so he preached to them in a way that helped them to understand what the law was given for. But to the Gentiles that didn't have the law, he had to preach to them in a different way, because they weren't under the law. "To the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak." I can't help crying. I don't know why. It just touched my heart. That's what we are to do. Win the lost at any cost. And I sometimes don't know how. "To the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I have made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some." Save some. Hallelujah. "And this I do for the gospel's sake, that I might be partaker thereof with you." Paul wasn't trying to make himself outside of the church or better than them or even less than them. He wanted to partake of the gospel with them. He wanted to be a part of the church. and doing his job and doing it well. 24 says, Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize? So run that you may obtain. So he's likening our work, our lives after we get saved, as running in a race. And running in a race to receive the prize. So run that you may obtain. And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. So he's talking about the race when a bunch of people are running a race out there across the ground and trying to get to a certain place first. You know what a race is. So they're people that do that, they're trying to obtain a crown that's of the flesh, a corruptible crown. But he said we're doing it to obtain an incorruptible crown, one that's for eternal, an eternal crown. And he said that when we strive for the mastery, when we're trying to do the best job for the Lord that we possibly can, he said you're temperate in all things. What does temperate mean? Let's see if it's back here. To me, I believe it means that you don't go overboard in anything. That you are watched to just be what you ought to be. Temperate. It's not here. Temperate, but that's what it means. It means that you're taking care of just being what you ought to be and not go overboard in one direction or another. And sometimes people are, let's just say, for example, they feel like they have to fast all the time. Then that isn't temperate. Or some people feel like they can do anything they want to and still preach the gospel. That isn't temperate. Temperate means you're taking care to do things in a manner that isn't going to work against what you're doing. You're striving for the mastery and is temperate in all things. So you do the best you can and try to be temperate. Try to be willing to do things in moderation like you ought to. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. I therefore so run, not as uncertainly. So fight I, not as one that beateth the air. But I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. So Paul knew that all of us are fighting against the lust of the flesh, the things that the body wants to do that is not what would help us to run the race. So he makes us know that in order to run, you need to be willing to keep under your body and bring it into subjection. If you're somebody that all you want to do is eat and sleep, and we can get that way, all you want to do is eat and sleep, you got to remember that your body is fighting against you running this race. And just as if when somebody trains to run a physical race, they have to be willing to eat the right things and sleep the right amount and all that, and work and exercise and do the things they need to do to be able to run that race. We have to do the same thing. We have to be willing to say no to the flesh and yes to the Spirit of God. We have to be willing to keep under our body and bring it into subjection. Because if I preach to others, but I am not right myself, I'm not doing my best to do what I ought to do as far as my body is concerned. Lest when I, by lest that by any means when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. I'm not really even connected. And Paul understood that if you allow your body to have its way in the fleshly ways, that you could preach to others and be a castaway in your own self. I therefore so run not as uncertainly, verse 26, so fight I, not as one that beateth the air, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest by any means when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. So this running the race, we must find help from God to run it in such a way that we would be a blessing everywhere we go, that we would by all means win some, save some, help some. So that's the end of that chapter, and we're going to start chapter 10 tomorrow. So God bless you.